are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lance French, and welcome to our Implementing a Culture for Employee Safety webinar with Lori Siegelman. Lori, thanks for being with us this morning.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
I first wanted to start off with a little some admin notes as we're getting started. This is going to be kind of a we're going to get you guys involved in the webinar, so we're going to be sending out poll questions just to kind of get some information on your organization. So we'll be highlighting those throughout. And if you have any questions, there's a question tab you should see on your webinar box. So type your questions, and I will ask Lori as we get going. If we do not get to your question right away, I will apologize in advance, but I will make sure that Lori gets your questions answered, and I will send them to you over email. So with that, Lori, why don't you start off by giving us a little information about yourself?
Well, I've been doing environmental and safety and industrial hygiene type of work for quite a long time now, about 20 years. I have a variety of experience both in industry and then also as a consultant. So I've had the opportunity to be on both sides of it. So I have been in a safety manager type role at a manufacturing facility, a couple of different ones: chemical manufacturing, pharmaceutical research, and also electronics manufacturing, where I served that role. I've served a role in a corporate for a while, implementing management systems, and then in consulting here for the past 5 or 8 years. I've had an opportunity then to be on the consulting side of it, sharing my knowledge and seeing even more variety of manufacturing, oil and gas, mining type facilities. So hopefully I have enough knowledge, and I've seen enough variety of things that I could help with safety questions and anything that might come up today.
Well, I feel safer already, so great. Well, let's get started with so what does safety culture in the workplace mean, Lori?
Well, that's a term that gets thrown around quite a bit. That for the larger companies or the top-notch companies, they have this safety culture in place. Basically, that means that everybody follows the rules. Of course, that infers there are rules. So you have the company, they've looked at their operation, they have policies, procedures, and rules in place. All of the companies feel involved. You go into a company and you can kind of see the difference between one that has a good safety culture and one that doesn't through the physical appearance. The housekeeping is good. The employees are involved and happy. They're following the rules. They're wearing their PPE. There's oftentimes visible evidence. There's posters, safety bulletin boards, marking on the floor, and things like that. So these companies that have the safety culture in place, they'll have more participation from their employees, and throughout all areas, they've evaluated all their hazards, and they have their standards in place to control those hazards.
Okay. Well, I think that's a perfect time to execute our first poll question. So the first poll question is, I'm going to give you guys an extended version. I only had a certain amount of characters on the poll question. So do your employees at your company, particularly the production employees or laborers, feel comfortable raising safety issues with their supervisor? And are they encouraged to report incidents, and would they feel as if they could stop working if they felt unsafe? Or do you see that a lot of organizations have a problem with that, with employees not feeling comfortable to bring up issues?
Yeah, and I see that in a variety of ways, in a couple of different situations. One, you have some companies where their focus is on production. It's get it done, get it done. And even if the supervisors or the managers in management talk safety, you know, they have their sign-up, safe workplace and keep track of incidents and everything, that if through their physical actions, the leadership of the company doesn't really encourage employees to report hazards or stop work to take care of things, if they haven't really embraced that safety culture, then their employees aren't going to feel comfortable stopping production and going to their manager. So I see that quite a bit of time. Also, if there's a big emphasis on incentives, maybe you have different departments compete with each other every month to see who can have the least amount of incidents, or an incident-free department that month, and they get raffles or prizes. So that sometimes will often prevent people from reporting incidents or hazards as well.
Okay. I'm going to close the poll right now, and I'm going to go ahead and share the results. It looks like 80% are saying yes, they do have employees feel comfortable raising issues. 15% said I think they do, and then 5% said, well, they tell me they do. So what do you think about those results?
So they tell you they do, but then there's an issue and they feel like, well, maybe they shouldn't say anything because it'll stop production that day, or it'll slow down, or it might affect the perception of their department or their group.
Yeah, they might get mad at me for, yeah, I get that. So, okay, so what's the first step to get there?
If you don't already have this safety culture, it's not really embedded in your organization, and you want to take that next step, or maybe you've got a culture there, but it's not as good as you want, or you want to continually improve. I found that it's really the leadership, and obviously this is cliche. Everybody in safety has always heard this. You have to have leadership commitment, but really, what does that look like? The main thing to me is to get leadership commitment, and then beyond that, have the leaders equipped to actually do and implement what they need to do. And that's going to require some training and skills on their part. So if they don't already have that knowledge base of safety and what it's all about, and how to go about doing certain things, they're not going to be as successful unless they have this training, and some kind of training and understanding and base skill set in order to continue with the culture or to implement a culture that's not already there. Safety needs to be just a way of life rather than perceived as an annoyance that most people think it gets in the way of production. So if you want to make that transition, you need leadership commitment to do that. And in order to get that commitment and then have that commitment be translated into actual action, you have to equip your leaders with the tools they need to do that, and by way of training, training and understanding, and of course that shows in their commitment then. The first thing, really, once leadership, president, plant manager, what have you, they've embraced the safety, yes, we want to have safety be safety culture, we want to improve our program, et cetera, et cetera. So what would be the first step after that? Once they're committed to that safety and safety culture, you give them the training, you get some understanding of what it all means, and then come up with a policy statement. There's no regulatory requirement anywhere that says you have to have a policy statement, but if you look around at any of the companies that you believe have a safety culture and a good safety program, almost all of them, if not every one of them, will have some kind of policy statement. And then what that policy statement also reflects is how committed are they, or is the policy statement this generic 2 or 3 line paragraph that doesn't really reflect their core value or what they do. And I've put up I've come up with a couple of different policy statements that are fairly generic, but could, with a little tweaking, could reflect a company's more core values. The first one I put up is more it's a little more generic, but I think with a couple more line items and a little bit of tweaking, a company could modify it to fit their company. And if you go to the next one, Here's more of a safety statement. It's not really a safety policy per se, but it's more of a mission statement that incorporates reference to safety in that second part. Strive to provide a safe work environment, but it's more reflective of a company's overall core values and could be more effective as a policy statement depending on the company. So once the leaders embrace the safety culture, they sit down and with some employees and teamwork, they come up with a good policy statement. They have that training. Of course, you can't do this all at once. It's a stepwise process, but they get some training, some understanding of safety, and then you can move on to the next step after the training and the leadership commitment piece.
Okay. Well, I will launch our next poll is, does your company have a general policy statement reflecting management's commitment to safety? It may often be combined with environmental and sometimes also with quality. Okay. So far, we've got 100 people, 100% saying yes, so we'll give that a few more minutes and see where that takes us. So Lori, what type of training or skills do leaders have at companies with a safety culture, and what do they do differently than leaders at companies that don't have a safety culture?
Well, if leaders have embraced safety and you have a culture of safety in your organization, then the leaders are tasked with, I mean, everybody has their responsibilities. You have responsibilities defined at the employee level and really all levels up to the senior manager on site. And for each of those responsibilities, then you would want to see some type of training or prerequisite for whatever responsibility these leaders have been given in the way of safety. So, for instance, if you're in a culture of safety, you want to walk the floor. Your leaders, your supervisors, your managers need to walk around and do inspections, either off the cuff or formal planned inspections or combination of the two. But just to say to go out and walk around and do an inspection or to walk around from a safety perspective and look at different things, you need to equip those individuals with what to look for. What do you look for in an inspection? How to do the inspection? What's safe versus unsafe? And then if you are doing that inspection, right, and you're going to find some hazards or find some physical hazards or observe some unsafe behaviors in your employees, you need to know how to prioritize in order to go and set corrective actions, prioritize what are you going to address first, track those things to closure. So there's a process to do inspections, to set preventive or corrective actions to fix what you've seen during your inspection, and then follow through the loop to make sure those items actually get fixed or things get implemented to prevent an accident from happening. So there's a whole process in place, and if the leaders are simply told that part of their responsibility is to do inspections or to walk the floor and look for safety items with none of the tools or the knowledge that comes with that responsibility, then they're not going to be as effective. So that's one type of training. So for every responsibility, for every task they've been assigned for safety, they would need training. Some other examples might be hazard assessment and correction. So how do you assess a hazard? If you have a strong safety program, really you're looking at all of your different hazards, so all of the different tasks or all of the different areas of your facility that you have. You want to look at each one and do a hazard assessment or a personal protective equipment assessment. And in the course of doing that, there's a certain things you look for, and a certain method of doing that. And kind of like an inspection. If you see, here's my list of hazards when I do these tasks, then there has to be certain controls for those hazards so that you control the hazards. You reduce your risk or you eliminate your risk of injury or illness. So there's a method of doing that. So you would want to see your leaders trained in that, even if they're not going to be doing hazard assessments personally. Ideally, you want your employees to participate in that exercise. So the supervisors of the employees, if they have a good understanding of how that is accomplished, then they can better equip their employees and allow their employees to participate in that hazard assessment process and understand why it's important. Some of the other trainings that might be helpful for them to have is communication, group communications, and this is one I rarely see. You have supervisors, foremen maybe, or lead men that may not have formal education. They may not have much communications type of expertise or education or experience, but you're expecting them to train. You're expecting them to do on-the-job training or toolbox talks, etc. But you don't equip them with the skill set to communicate very well. So that's another type of kind of soft skill you might think about incorporating your leader training.
Can you give us some specific examples of what you've seen in the past of like companies, and I wouldn't use the companies, but like where you've come in and they didn't have this thing, and can you kind of show us kind of what things you put in place to help them with their safety culture?
Sure. Another thing with building the safety culture is getting the employees involved and having them participate. And I know this is another one of those cliche terms that a good safety program or safety culture involves employee participation. So that employee participation could mean a variety of different things, but one thing is to get them involved in the hazard assessment process or the PPE assessment process. So what I've done in the past with companies that want to kind of go to the next step is come in and meet with a group of the employees, maybe a representative of each department or each group, and go over, give them that training that I was just talking about. What is a hazard assessment? How would you go about doing it? What type of hazards are you looking for? How would you prioritize those hazards, and what controls would look like? So I give them the training. We start with a group of individuals, employees who are actually out there doing the work, because they're the ones that knows where the hazards are better than anybody. And then have them go out then to the workplace and just help integrate some of the knowledge that they know into the planning process, instead of having it just be the ESH manager or just the supervisor of the area. We get all of the employees involved, and if you spread the work around, not only does it increase the knowledge base of all of the individuals that are working there, it makes the whole process go a little quicker of getting your workplace assessed and all of your hazards controlled as much as possible.
Okay. Well, I think right now we're going to share the poll results for the last survey question, which is, does your company have a general policy statement? And 80% said yes, 3% said no, 13% says, I know we have one, but I don't know what it is, and then 3% says, I don't think we have one. So what would you say to the 19% that said they either know, or I think we know, or but I don't know what it is?
Well, that would tell me that those companies may not have a really strong safety program, or I've seen sometimes that there is a strong safety program from a compliance aspect, and that the leadership is very interested in making sure their company is compliant. And so they may not have a safety policy per se, but they're very actively involved, the managers in the management of the company, the leaders of the company, very actively involved in making sure their company maintains compliance. So they don't necessarily have a policy statement. But when you dig a little deeper into the company, you realize that those leaders may not have a good understanding of basic loss control and the not necessarily the importance, but the help it would have the positive benefits of having a more robust safety program that went beyond just making sure you're in compliance. And so back to the training piece, building the knowledge and the skill set of the leaders on how effective and beneficial it could be to go beyond that compliance stage would be what I would recommend to those individuals, to just educate their leaders a little further on how important it is or what benefits there are of going beyond compliance, get in more of a safety management system, more of a robust system in place rather than just minimal compliance.
Okay, great. And I'm going to launch the third poll right now, which is our managers, which include foremen, leadmen, supervisors, etc., within your company provided with specific training related to their safety responsibilities, such as how to properly conduct an incident investigation or a workplace inspection. So while they're answering that, it's like, so Lori, you've been talking about how important it is to get, you know, the leaders on board first. That's kind of your first step, and then for creating a safety culture, and then getting the employees involved there. So what can they do to get the employees on board as well? And everyone says that employees must be involved, but what does that really mean?
Well, yeah, what that means is, first off, I've seen it too many times where the employees aren't really, if you don't have that leadership commitment, okay, you don't have the leadership understanding of the importance and the benefits of this going beyond compliance and safety culture, then the culture is this, that the employees are focused on production, they're focused on doing their job, and they don't really have an opportunity to participate in safety because in order to take the time out of their day to go to a meeting or to go to training that's not like compliance-driven training, it doesn't really exist. So how they could be involved and participate more is to go to a non-mandatory training that talks about incident investigation. So they get this training on an incident investigation, and they can participate in incident investigations along with their supervisor or on an incident investigation team. Or what I've seen very effective in some places is these toolbox talks. And a lot of companies do it either weekly or daily, depending on how many employees they have and what type of environment. You might have weekly or monthly, some frequency toolbox talks or little half-hour group communications. If you spread that around and say, here you have this department or this group of employees, so each person is going to take a turn. 1 week it'll be Joe's turn, and the next week it's going to be Jerry's turn, and then so every week somebody else has a turn. They can pick the topic and come up with a little 10-minute talk or 5-minute talk about a topic. But this is time away from production, right? It's time away from actually doing their job. And so if you don't have already a safety culture in the organization, a lot of times the employees aren't going to be able to or won't feel comfortable with taking that time away. And if they don't have the skills and expertise or comfort level to do that kind of talk or to present that kind of talk, it could be a little bit of a challenge. But if you're wanting to expand your program and increase your culture, increase your performance, then this is one kind of unique way I'm seeing it. It helps educate your employees because everybody knows that saying, you really learn something if you teach it. So your employees get a chance to learn about a topic, speak about it, so it increases their communication skills and things like that. Some other really quick ways that employees can participate is take turns doing workplace inspections. Or do a workplace inspection, but just of your particular area, and have that be embedded within the employee's job description or their list of tasks and responsibilities that they're supposed to do every week or every day. Follow the rules. Go to required training. just little tiny things, report hazards, provide feedback, give suggestions for improvements in the process for safety. So there's a variety of ways that employees can participate in the safety program.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share our results for our last poll question. And it says that 64% say yes, that they are provided with specific training, and then 11% said we have in the past, but it's been a while. 18% said not to my knowledge, and 7% said we need help with this. So where do we go from here with those guys?
Well, I would say that's great. It looks like the majority of our attendees have a fairly solid safety program if they're getting their leaders trained in incident investigation and they have the policy statement and things like that. So for those types of companies that have this in place already, I would say one step further, in particular specific to incident investigation, is how about going back and reviewing the incident investigation reports that you have done and kind of rate the quality of those reports. How consistently were they done, and did they have adequate or good information? Did they really identify root causes, or did they all say it was the employee's fault? Right, because you can have a good written incident investigation program and an awesome form to fill out, and even the training that goes along with how to do the investigation. But when push comes to shove and you're actually doing the investigation, how well was it done? So companies that have that whole process in place and it's well implemented could go that next step to kind of look at, well, how well was it done, and make some changes regarding that. So if there's room for improvement, if they review, say, the past year or the past 2 years. Companies that have that program in place, they have a good safety program, they haven't had any accidents, so they don't have any investigations to review, I would say, well, are you investigating your near misses, and are you investigating hazards that are identified? For those companies that don't have a program, or they have a program and maybe their folks aren't really trained on proper incident investigation techniques, I would say get the training first, educate the people that's been deemed responsible. If anybody's been deemed responsible, I guess the first step is who's going to do it. So there's certain rules of thumb, I guess. The employee involved needs to be the affected employee who's had the accident needs to be involved in the investigation, and the employee's supervisor. So there's some level of training once you decide who's tasked with that responsibility. Give them the training and the tools that they need to do that. It's a written system for investigating the incident, or a written SOP for conducting the inspection. You know, whatever thing that we're talking about, is there a consistent method to do that, and the training behind it for those people who've been tasked to do it. And then once you have all of that in place, go back and see what are the quality of the inspections, what's the quality of the investigations, and is there room for improvement there?
Okay. Casey has a question. Have you seen that behavior-based safety programs are effective, or is there a better option?
I have seen behavior-based safety program be effective, but the couple of places I've seen that to be effective are those places that had just your standard safety program in place first, and then they wanted to go that next step. So they had incident investigation, workplace inspections. So they had your kind of standard things that you do. They had leaders who were all responsible, had their responsibilities lined out for them, and they had a good training program in place. And they said, well, what can we do? What is that next step? And so then they implemented the behavior-based safety. Although I've seen another place that they tried to do behavior-based safety and they didn't really have a good base in place first. And that worked pretty well. For a little while, it got the employees involved, and when they first started it and launched it, it was kind of a big thing. But it seems like it didn't work as well for that company than for the couple I've seen where they had a good, solid program in place to start with.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and launch the last poll question, and this would be a good time if you guys who are listening out there have any questions to go ahead and type them in. But right now, the question is launched is, are employees at your company allowed to spend time away from production-related activities to participate in safety? Examples: sit on a safety committee, develop an SOP, attend mandatory training, or help perform safety review or a task. So while that's going, Lori, there's some on the slide. There's a cost of loss. Can you want to kind of explain that slide a little bit while they're answering the poll?
Right, sure. And this is one of the knowledge or the training or the understanding of leaders that I had been talking about earlier, is the cost of loss. So many leaders or foremen or lead men don't have a good understanding of the cost, what happens when an incident happens. I mean, how much that actually costs a company. And part of the understanding of basic loss control that helps open leaders' eyes to go beyond compliance, to limit their incidents or their incident rate as much as possible, is the idea that the cost is much more than simply those couple of hours that was like lost time that the employee had to stop working, go to the doctor. It's much more than that. It's the workers' compensation cost. It's the cost of doing the incident investigation, the cost of the supervisor that has to stop and work with the employee. It's the cost of getting a temporary employee in place if that happens. All of those underlying hidden costs are much more than just the direct, very visible costs of what the doctor bill was and the specific time off for the one employee that was injured. You've got witnesses maybe that have to participate in the incident investigation, et cetera, depending on what the accident or incident is. So even a small incident that is just maybe a trip to the nurse's office if you have a first aid clinic or just a first aid box, just that half hour or hour even that the employee has to take to go get the Band-Aid or what have you, can double or triple in cost if you look at the indirect costs. So if you educate your leaders in management on loss control and that underlying hidden costs and open their eyes to how much that it really costs your company on incidents, that it makes them a little more aware of and more open to implement systems and procedures and things that will help minimize the risk of incidents.
Okay. And then there's the hazardous analysis. Do you want to give a quick explain, or is it pretty self-explanatory?
Oh, I did. I just put that on there. I thought it would be helpful, a helpful example for the attendees to see. This is just one way to rank your hazards. So one of the critical things, or the building blocks, I guess, of a good safety program is, obviously, you want to figure out where your hazards are in your workplace. And once you figure out where those hazards are, what are the controls, or do you have controls in place? And what's the severity or the risk of that hazard? So you can prioritize. I mean, you go do a sweeping hazard assessment of your facility, and you come along with 50, 75, 100 different tasks that you've analyzed. Where do you start as far as, okay, we're going to go fix things, or we're going to go implement different things because we want to reduce our overall risk of incidents. This is just one way. There's a variety of ways, but this is just one way, and I've used it a few different times, and it seems to work well. And it integrates well if you're implementing a management system also. And you can also incorporate environmental things in this matrix type evaluation. So you have your area, or you have your task, or you have your department, or however you're analyzing something, and you have what the hazard is. Then you rate it. How severe is it? How frequent does it happen? So drum handling, for instance. You handle your drum, you're transferring contents. Your hazard is some kind of vapor exposure from that drum. The severity of the vapor exposure, let's say it's just an irritant. It's not a really super hazardous chemical, but it's an eye irritant. Severity is a 2. But you're handling the drum every day or every other day, so the frequency of your exposure to that vapor is fairly high. So on a scale of, I don't know, 1 to 5, you would give it a 4. And your control is fairly high. Say you have some kind of ventilation system or general ventilation, so you're not having everything in your breathing zone. You can even consider compliance. Is there a regulation or a rule? Say your air permit maybe has something in it that says you can't have an open container or something. So you would give it a 1. So your total risk would be, you multiply those together, you come up with a total risk of, some number. And depending on your situation, you can set your, I'll say like an action level. So anything that has a risk above a certain level, you would give it a high priority to go fix. And everything else that has a risk below a certain level, you could give it a lower priority level to go fix. So that gives you some kind of method or tool to, once you evaluate all of your hazards on your site or do all your JHAs, you have some way to prioritize your efforts to go and fix those things.
Okay. So this is a great tool to, might be some eye-opening things. Has everybody ever come to you and said, hey, you know what, I really had no idea that we had these issues. We thought everything was okay, but now we've done this checklist, we're finding out, wow, we really need to address this.
Right. Yeah. Until you really look at the severity, you look at an operation or you look at a task, and until you really break it down into the steps, and anybody in safety, I think, knows the term, the JHA, or task hazard analysis, job hazard assessment, where you break the job into steps, and for each one, then you kind of see, well, where the hazards are, where could something go wrong, and what is the risk of that? Is it a high risk or low risk, and what controls need to be put in place? But yeah, until you actually do that step for each of your tasks or hazards, you don't know. And there's a lot of non-routine things that are done, for instance, in maintenance, or in things that aren't strictly production-related in a manufacturing plant, say on the shipping and the receiving dock, where nobody's really looked at it, and until you look at it, you don't realize. So I have had the experience that people who have a fairly good safety program in place, and they've done their hazard assessments, PPE assessments, and on the surface it looks like a really good program, but when you look at the variety of tasks and jobs that their employees are doing, they've only really looked at a small portion of them. And when you start looking deeper, there's a lot of uncontrolled hazards and risks that have been going on, and nobody has really realized that. And so they do a really consistent hazard assessment of the entire company.
Okay. We have 2 more questions. As a consultant, how do you get safety program or culture buy-in from small town, old school oil field companies? Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, when we figure out the answer to that, let me know. I don't know.
Okay.
No, actually, I think it really goes back to the education, and I want to say training, but training really doesn't capture it. It's if there's a way to communicate and equip the people, the old school people, with the knowledge and understanding of the benefits of having more, of having the better safety culture. Just because they've done it that way forever doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. And just the benefits of doing it that way. So you take a little extra time. It gets in your way. Yes, all that. But if somehow you could make them understand the why and how it would benefit them, then I think that would get the buy-in. But if you have somebody just kind of preaching at them and talking at them saying, we're going to do this, and you don't get their participation, then you're not going to be very successful. But getting their participation and having them involved in it is going to require somebody at the manager leadership level to decide that it's okay for them to spend time away from their task at hand and away from the production. And I think that's where you get in trouble is they're not given that time away from the production to get a chance to have that understanding and information that it's going to take for them to turn their way of thinking around.
Okay. And we have two more questions. Where can one find examples of costs associated with loss?
There is a fairly good website out there, International Loss Control Institute, and they have a better iceberg picture. It actually has costs on it. I couldn't find my picture of that, or else I would have put it in the presentation, but it actually has costs in it, and I think that whole institute, ILCI, and also I believe OSHA has some statistics there as well. It's a little hard to find, but I would be happy to follow up with whomever with statistics.
Okay. And then once action levels are established, is there an example of a hierarchy to set for types of actions to take?
There is, and off the top of my head, I can't remember it right now, and I don't want to go root around in my files, but there is. I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, so once you get your priorities, say you do a workplace inspection, and in the workplace inspection form or your checklist, you have a little box that you can kind of check and rate its risk. Okay, so when you're setting your corrective actions, if it's a risk, if it's high risk, you want it corrected immediately, or you close that area off, you stop doing that task, or you basically quit doing whatever it is, you keep the people away, you block the area, depending on what the hazard is. Okay, so if it's high, you want it immediately fixed. If you can't immediately fix it, then you need to eliminate that risk by stopping the operation or blocking the area off. If it's a moderate risk, medium risk, then you want to, say, fix it within a week. And then if you have a low-level risk hazard, then you give yourself 4 weeks or 6 weeks. There's a couple of different time scales that I've seen depending on what it is.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that answered the question or not.
And one of our listeners made a comment on the question of where can one find examples of costs associated with loss. He says have them contact their insurance company for a loss run. So there's another avenue to take as well. And so, okay, so this is the last chart. Can you want to just kind of give them a quick, brief overview of this one, or?
Yeah, this is just one I pulled from the OSHA website that is for their VPP sites, and for those that may not be aware of the voluntary protection program that OSHA manages. That is just a kind of a voluntary program that companies can subscribe to and get kind of OSHA stamp of approval on their safety programs. And the statistics show that if you have a strong safety culture, you have a good safety program, The voluntary protection program is just really a standard management system where you get employee involvement, you have your leadership commitment, you have your workplace assessment and training component. It just shows there's statistics out there that shows that companies starting in year 5 years prior to having a safety management system, their incident rate was higher. For instance, in year 5, days away from work was 58, and by the time they get to year 2, it's lower. So I just wanted to pull that out to show that there is a statistic significance to having a safety program. There's statistics out there that show your incident rate does go down if you have a good safety program and a good hazard assessment program, leadership training, and employee involvement.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share the last poll results. The poll results were for our employees at your company allowed to spend time away from production to participate in safety. 84% yes, so we got a pretty strong crowd here. 3% said no, and 13% was very limited. So your
Excellent.
thoughts? Okay, good. So, Lori, that's it. That completes our webinar. Do you have anything, closing remarks that you want to share with anybody?
No, I guess I will just give an example of one company that it's been several years now since I've visited that company, but I'm still impressed with what they were able to do. And I'll just real quick give an example of that, and it might spark some ideas in some of our participants. I had the opportunity to go to a company a manufacturing company, and they manufactured kind of a dusty type, I don't know, grout or adhesive or something to that effect. So it wasn't an easy place to keep clean, and it was kind of a messy manufacturing operation, and actually most are. And they had a terrible incident rate, a lot of accidents, a lot of incidents. They had a manager come in, a plant manager come in, and wanted to turn things around. And what he was able to do over a very short amount of time was just really amazing. And the way he did that is he made safety part of everybody's job description, from the highest leader down to the lowest, laborer there. And it was part of their job description, and the tasks or the responsibilities that they had been assigned, depending on what they did or who they were, or what their level of involvement was, they had specific responsibilities. And they were paid, their performance appraisals quarterly were based on did they do those things and how well did they do those things. And so there was very specific expectations set for each and every person there at the plant. Not just the workers, not just the managers, but everybody had very specific expectations related to safety, in addition to production and in addition to quality, also safety. And each manager, so the plant manager would go and review the manager below him, and managers then would review the supervisors below them. So if on a weekly or quarterly basis, some frequency, they would look to see, have you done this, have you done that, have you done this other thing. And again, it wasn't just safety, but safety was included. It was production, and it was quality as well. And they had assessed the hazards in their workplace. They put up very visual signs. Say, for instance, for the forklift driver, in their forklift area where they parked the forklift, they had a big poster that said, what are the rules for forklifts? Wear the seat belts, stop at big intersections in the plant so you don't run over anybody. So very specific rules. If that forklift driver was observed not wearing a seatbelt or not following the rules, then he was kind of dinged that day. But anyway, it was very involved, but it wasn't anything that was too complex. It didn't take a really super long time to implement. And it was all about employee expectations, setting expectations, reviewing employees' performance based on those expectations, and then either rewarding those employees who did well and not rewarding those employees who didn't do well. And they made just a amazing transformation over the span of like 12 weeks.
That's awesome. Yeah, awareness is awareness that you find awareness is half the battle, or is that just the beginning? Is that just a step?
I think it's just a step, awareness, and then is management serious? The awareness, are they serious? Do they actually walk the talk and get out there and do it and implement it, or is it just the latest flavor of the month, and then 6 weeks from now it's kind of all gone? So there has to be systems put in place, consistent, and throughout the organization, and not just certain individuals.
Yeah. Well, great job, Lori. We really appreciate your time, and I'm sure that our listeners have really have gotten a lot out of your webinar. If you guys are out there and have a specific question for Lori, or a specific incident that you need her help with, you can contact her with the information you see on the slide here. Or you can also contact me. My name is Lance French. If you have any questions having to do with future webinars, or you see any misspellings in the slides. But anyway, somebody did ask, can we receive the slideshow? And I have been recording the slideshow since we started, and the answer to that is yes. I will be sending you guys the link so you can watch this at your convenience, and send it to whomever you would like. And Lori, you're going to love this. They're asking for when the next training session with Lori is. So that's awesome. She loves doing this so much. So on your survey, there's a question that says, what topics would you like to talk about next time? And so we will absolutely schedule that probably after the summer session. So Lori, thank you again for your time, and we really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. You guys have a great day.